name is Sarema Comino, and today we're going to be talking about the Bible. Okay, so to start things off, we have the origins of the Bible. We have the Old Testament. It includes an example of Adam and Eve, the story of them. And then after the Old Testament is written, we have the New Testament, and that's when Jesus Christ comes to earth and gets crucified on the cross. Both focus on God, and he wants to tell people to stop sinning. So in the Old Testament, we have the first section, and it covers the creation of earth with Adam and Eve, and then we have the story of Noah, his ark, the flood, Moses with the 10 Commandments and the separation of the Red Sea, and then it finishes with the Jews being expelled to Babylon. There's 51 books that contain the Old Testament in the Catholic Bible, but for example, in other religions or other Bibles, we have more than 51, or it could be less than 51, but specifically in the Catholic one, we have 51 stories. In the Old Testament, it explains the history of the creation, the exodus of the Israelites, and then the 10 Commandments. It was written in Hebrew and Aramaic, and it focuses on the Lord being the only God. So an example of one of the stories, one of the most important ones, is Moses when he separates the Red Sea. Adam and Eve takes a forbidden fruit given to her by the snake, and is the devil himself. We have Noah and the ark, and he has to take a pair of each animal and bring him along in his boat. We have the laws of the 10 Commandments, which is the laws that God wants us to follow. We have Goliath and King David. And then, of course, we have the most important one found in Genesis, the first book in the Old Testament, is the creation of the whole universe, which takes 6 days, or took actually 6 days. But then on the 7th day, God rested. And that's why we have Mass on Sundays. So the Old Testament is a 3-part collection of Hebrew scrolls called Torah, Nevi'im, and Ketuvim. Torah are teachings, Nevi'im are prophets, and then Ketuvim writings. In the Torah, we have 5 books of Moses, and it retells the story of how the family of Abraham came to be. And that was the first generation of Jesus. Through Abraham is how Jesus is born. And then for the prophets, we have the leaders that return to God and the Torah. And then for the writings, we have a lot of short stories, histories, romantic tales, poetries. And then now for the New Testament. So it tells the story of the life of Jesus and the many parables he taught, and the stories and how he wanted everything to be. And it tells the early days of Christianity, of the first religion. It has 27 books, and they were all written in Greek. In the Old Testament, the stories were written in either Aramaic or Hebrew, but in the new one, it was all Greek. So the sections of the New Testament, it concerns Jesus, and we have 4 Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And it was written 40 years after his death. So now for the Gospels. So the earliest book of which we found is the book of John, of Mark, and it was written 40 years after his death. They were all published anonymously, which means it had no author, but it was believed to be either Mark, Luke, Matthew, or John. And then after Mark comes Luke and Matthew, and they all use examples or stories from the Gospel of Mark. And then after that, we have John, and he is believed to be the beloved disciple of Jesus Christ. So all of the stories contain many, many similarities, but then a few contradictions. So here we have Matthew as a tax collector. Here we have an example of a parable found in Mark, the symbol of the ox with Luke, and then the beloved disciple John, and many other stories. And here we see an example of the Bible. This is the Old Testament, and then here you can see the New Testament. Thank you.